Greetings, it's Vaygrim. I know you're asking yourself, why are we looking at your ugly mug and not at a gameplay video of Bioshock Infinite? Well, we're 19 videos in right now. We're a big chunk of time and a whole bunch of stuff has actually been revealed. And I kind of wanted to go over it and kind of think on it some before we progressed into episode 20 and onward. I think we're getting close to the end run of the storyline. We're starting to see the end game play out, and I really wanted to think on some of the really elaborate storylines and stuff that's actually been gone over. Like, starting from the beginning, right? Bioshock Infinite is set in 1912. Now, that is 22 years after the battle for Wounded Knee. Our main protagonist, Booker DeWitt, was actually a soldier in the 7th Cavalry Division at the Battle for Wounded Knee. He was right in the thick of it and saw the absolute worst of the worst that Custer tried to pull off. And he did not fare so well in terms of, not mentally, it did not make him unstable, but it definitely had a weighing effect on his soul. And he sought out various points of recourse. And you hear him mention about not wanting to go through a baptism once before, early on in the game when you actually first get to Columbia. There's this long scene, or it's a scene where there's a long hallway that's divided into kind of like channels with different people in white robes going through the baptism process before they can allow it to be admitted into Columbia. Now, Columbia itself is a really weird thing. Booker DeWitt is seen in the opening sequences of the game as being recruited by a pair of interesting people that you will later discover is Robert and Rosalind Lutece. The Lutesses are basically supposed to be twins, brother and sister, that are both scientists. They're both physicists. Rosalind Lutece, the sister, was basically the one that actually invented the anti-gravity technology that allows Columbia to stay up in the sky where it is. So the first exposure you get to this whole culture is through a lighthouse, which is very, very akin to the opening of Bioshock 1. And you are, instead of being shot straight down to the bottom of the sea, to Rapture, you are shot to a skybound utopia known as Columbia. And you're shot up into the air. Basically, what's revealed is that not too long, just 3 or 4 years after the Battle for Wounded Knee was in 1890. And in 1893, a gentleman by the name of Zachary Hale Comstock appoints himself as a prophet to the divine, or for the divine, and he actually goes and lobbies with the United States government to get funding from the Senate to actually make this skybound city that's going to make use of this technology that has been invented by Rosalind Lutece. And this technology will allow the city to float. And the United States government is initially all for this and help him actually build the city. But what you discover very, very quickly is that once he makes the city, one of the first scenes you have is you go through this baptism process. Then after the baptism, you are greeted by 3 statues of George Washington, Andrew Jackson, and Ben Franklin. They're called Father Washington, Father Franklin, Father Jackson. And they are literally lifted up as deities. You have each one holding a different symbol. The key, the sword, and the scroll. And each one exhibits a specific personality or righteous virtue that people aspire to. People make comments of, our son is really good on the sword, but he's not too swift on the scroll, if you know what I mean. So people are actually praying to the founding fathers of the United States as if they are religious icons and deities. And Zachary Hale Comstock has come forth as the conduit between these divine icons and the people. And that's just within the first 20 minutes of gameplay. The Lutesses give you the appointment of going to and infiltrating Columbia and bringing back a girl by the name of Elizabeth. You have to bring her back alive and unharmed. Bring us the girl and we'll wipe away the debt. That is something that gets chanted over and over. You hear various sequences where he will black out and then wake back up. And when Booker DeWitt blacks out, he has these dreams of being back in his office where he was Pinkerton, private investigator. He was a former Pinkerton and then went private investigator. And you see his private investigator office, which I think was also his house because there's a bed in there. And you see him sitting at the desk, or he is sitting at the desk, and you hear a beating on the door. DeWitt, bring us the girl and we'll wipe away the debt. What you would discover over time is that Booker DeWitt has actually lost his wife during the childbirth of his daughter, Anna. And he didn't take it very well. He basically went into a drinking and gambling slump. That combined with the actual events of Wounded Knee have weighed heavily upon his soul, and he has not fared very well as a human being. So he generates a massive debt, massive gambling debt. So what he has to do is to give his services over to the Lutesses, who hire him to get this girl Elizabeth and rescue her. So your opening sequences, experiences of going to Columbia is first this kind of forced fake baptism prospect where he then gets into the city and he is immediately met by this pseudo-utopian society, this greater kind of ultra-America. It's almost like Zachary Hale Comstock didn't think that the normal people in America were patriotic enough. He did not think they were American enough, so he made his own separate ultra-America that he then fled to, and he has turned into an almost religious cult of sorts. And it's really strange. You learn very, very quickly, however, that it's not a utopian society. It's actually almost a dystopian society in disguise. You discover that there is mass amounts of racism, elitism. There are real bad issues of, there's a massive poverty gap between the actual rich and the poor. And it's a real strange situation, basically. You have this kind of faux thing set up where it looks like a utopian society, but it's actually a dystopian society being ruled by Zachary Hale Comstock and some of his enforcers. But getting into the city, you're very, very quickly met by this propaganda plastered all over the walls. This is real early in game about the false shepherd. One thing they show is the false shepherd being a almost like a reaper, the Grim Reaper. You see one issue of the one depiction of the false shepherd as a skeleton clad in robes with a scythe, and another one you see it as just a hand, and it has AD tattooed on the back of the right hand, and that is the exact same tattoo that Booker DeWitt has for what you'll discover is his daughter Anna DeWitt, which he does not discuss the state of early in game. But over and over, if you black out or if you die, if you fall basically in game because you lose health, you get revived at various points by like Elizabeth, and you'll have these snapshots of a dream sequence where he is in a fervor trying to fight off these people that are at his front door saying, "Bring us the girl and we'll wipe away the debt." What you start to realize is that does not just apply to his current mission. It also applies to his daughter and what happened to her. Now, this is later on you realize that, but basically what you realize is that he gave away his daughter to wipe his debt away. And he's still on a mission to wipe his debt, but it seems like a different kind of mission by this point in time. But anyway, the city itself is a gorgeous and beautiful city, but that's a thin veneer. There is a lot of social upheaval and social problems. There is a rebellious undercurrent called the Vox Populi that are causing problems for Zachary Howe Comstock. And one thing you learn very, very quickly, that supposedly one of the leaders of the Vox Populi killed Zachary Comstock's wife. I can't remember what her name is. Basically, I remember her as Mrs. Comstock, basically. And you hear of her death at the hands of the Vox Populi. So that's supposed to put a kind of a tilt on things. To progress matters even to an even stranger direction. It's not too long in that you realize they're talking about Rosalind Lutece, but you never see photos. It's not too long in that you start to run across Rosalind Lutece and somebody else that looks like could be a twin brother that you later get identified as Robert Lutece. And you realize those were the two that were in the boat initially dropping you off and hiring you for this mission to get Elizabeth and get her out and bring her back to New York safely from Columbia. And you keep running across them at various points in time with this almost predictive kind of a nature of theirs, where they'll finish each other's sentences, where they'll talk about all these extremely strange probabilities and odds and things like that, almost like they are perceiving a layer of reality different from everybody else. But at the point we not too long ago passed in game, you then later realize that Rosalind Lutece was experimenting with methods of, I don't think it was travel, but basically they figured out a way to puncture a hole, a rupture, into another parallel reality, an alternate reality. And it was at that point, if you do certain things, you'll reveal this hidden vault in one of the buildings that we just recently went through that has a log, an audio log, a voxophone, talking about how Robert is actually not Rosalind's brother. Robert Lutece is Rosalind Lutece. Like the same person. The only difference is that in one reality, they were born with a Y chromosome instead of two X's. They were born with an X and a Y. So basically in one reality, they were born a woman, and in one reality, they were born a man. And they are otherwise the same entity, the same personality, the same mind in how they were raised and their proclivities and their likes and dislikes. And that is why they have some kind of strange tie into each other. So that's one layer of weirdness already. Another thing that you have to pick up on it, but there is a point very early in your dealings with Elizabeth where you are trying to get her to this airship so you can flee town. You pass by somebody that knew her and refers to her as Annabelle, not as Elizabeth. Annabelle, Anna DeWitt. So I'm starting to see a certain connection there in that Elizabeth is of the right age, I think, that if she was given up just after, not too long after the battle for Wounded Knee, if basically after Wounded Knee in 1890, Booker DeWitt meets a lady, they get married, have a baby, the lady dies in childbirth, and Anna, the baby, is the only one that survives of the two. There's about the right age gap there, because that would be 1893, basically, a couple of years, let's say. That's about the time Columbia gets established. Zachary Hale Comstock shows up on the scene. And I think that would be actually the point when, if I'm piecing the puzzle together, Booker DeWitt gives up Anna to wipe away debt, but then he gets himself into even more trouble. He keeps sinking back into depression and gambling and drinking. So he has another debt that he is trying to wipe away now, and that is get Elizabeth and bring her back but I think Elizabeth Comstock, or Elizabeth, basically the girl, I think that is Anna DeWitt, his daughter. And I think Anna knows this after a little while in game, after hanging out with them. I think she figures that out. Another thing that's strange, circling back around to Zachary Comstock, there is a point where you're with Elizabeth going through this exhibit, this Hall of Heroes, where they go over these different battles that Zachary Hale Comstock and his warriors, his soldiers, have supposedly fought in, and Wounded Knee is one of those battles. The Wounded Knee and the Boxer Rebellion. And Booker DeWitt and, I can't remember the name, the general's name, bit of a psychopath that wants to die honorably. He makes the comment that Zachary Comstock was at Wounded Knee, but he doesn't remember seeing him there. And that comes up a couple of times, that supposedly Zachary Hale Comstock was fought in the battle for Wounded Knee, but Booker DeWitt and this other general do not remember seeing him there. So it's a very, very strange situation. So basically the timetables line up that I think Elizabeth is Anna DeWitt. That's my theory. I had a suspicion that there was something strange going on about the Lutesses also, and that got confirmed in a voxophone. I didn't think that they were brother and sister because there's some stranger connection that goes beyond that. The other thing I think is interesting is that they talk about how apparently Zachary Comstock was rendered sterile through prolonged exposure to their machine, their dimensional machine, as he was going back and forth looking for something. And that made him in a situation where he could not have kids. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, his wife, Miss Comstock, produces a daughter, Elizabeth. And there's a lot of voxophones that you pick up that talk about the rumor and the innuendo and the gossip behind that. Even the head of the rebellion, Daisy Fitzroy, talks about being a house servant for the Comstock house on the night that she walks in and finds Lady Comstock dead. And the baby is basically crying, still alive. So it's a very weird situation. It's a very strange thing. I have some other ideas for what's going on, but they're not concrete. They're not solid. I do think it's interesting, though, the overall concept of this kind of semi-utopian society that's actually being ruled almost like a tyranny, almost like a dictatorship, where America was not patriotic enough for Zachary Hale Comstock, and he had to take it up to this skyborn city where he could turn it into an organized religion and make it even more patriotic, ultra-patriotic, as it were. I think it's a really strange thing. There are other details I'm still figuring out, like how did Comstock fund? I know that there's a point where they talk about Colombia pulling away from America, there being tension between them. I remember seeing one of those little kinetoscopes that had that in there. That America was no longer devoted enough to the overall goal, to the overall, principles of Colombia. And so they had to pull away. They had to separate from America. I do remember seeing that. But how did he pay for it initially? How did he build it? Was that actually funded by America? I think it's interesting. I remember listening to a voxophone that I found talking about, it was a musician talking to another friend of his. He was talking about where he got all his amazing musical inspiration from one of these rifts, these holes, these tears through the fabric of reality that happen around, that seem to dot the landscape in Colombia, which I think has to do with the Lutesse's machine weakening the fabric of reality within the city itself, but that's a different argument. Anyway, the musician was talking about how he got these amazing ideas for all of his music from listening to it through one of these tears. There's even a point where you see Elizabeth tries to open up a tear to Paris, but it's Paris from the 1980s. How do I know that it's from the 1980s? Because there was actually a marquee in French over a movie theater That's one. But number two, that said Revenge of the Jedi, which was the actual alternate working title for Return of the Jedi when it came out in, I think that would have been 83 or 84. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting Easter egg. Something very, very strange to see. 1983, the original title for Return of the Jedi was Revenge of the Jedi until George Lucas thought that wasn't a revenge, was not a principle that a normal, good, light-sided Jedi would go on. They would not seek revenge. So it was changed to Return of the Jedi later. But I thought that was an interesting Easter egg in the game to kind of timestamp it. Oh, I know when that is. But she opens an actual tear to 1980s Paris. Not 1912 when the game is actually set, but 1980s. So there is an interplay of time and of alternate realities and alternate timelines that is getting bandied about. My theory is that at some point by the end of the game, it's going to tie back into the original Bioshock series as an alternate timeline for the whole tower concept. But I don't know that for sure. If I was writing the game, that's how I would do it. But there's still some things I don't know. You have to realize I'm only a little over the halfway mark into the game, I think, maybe a little bit farther. But I'm definitely fascinated by the storyline. It's very, very interesting. But I could actually see where if Elizabeth or if the Lutesses can open up one of those holes in reality and peek through, they could see alternate reality Bioshock, Rapture underwater, and they could get the inspiration of the big daddies, and that's where the big automen, the big repairmen guys would come from. It's a very, very interesting thing across the board. Anyway, look for episodes to actually resume on Friday, and we'll continue on through the storyline and see what we can figure out. Bye.